Welcome back to our podcast. Today, our president, Carroll Rios de Rodríguez, is interviewing Father Sirico on a topic that it is very important and also very close to their hearts. Jimmy Lai is a Hong Kong businessman and activist, founder of the popular newspaper The Daily Apple, a Catholic, and also a friend of Father Sirico. Carroll also had the chance to meet Jimmy Lai a few years back and remembers him dearly. Today's episode focuses on his life, the importance of his fight for freedom, and why we all must get involved. Reverend Sirico is President Emeritus and the co-founder of the Acton Institute. His writing on religious, political, economic, and social matters are published in a variety of journals. During his studies and early ministry, he experienced a growing concern over the lack of training religious studies students receive in fundamental economic principles, leaving them poorly equipped to understand and address today's social issues. As a result of these concerns, Father Sirico co-founded the Acton Institute with Chris Morin in 1990. Welcome to a new episode. We hope you enjoy it.
Hello, Father Sirico. It's a huge honor to chat with you about Acton Institute's newest documentary, Hong Konger.
I'm delighted to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you. This new documentary centers on the heroic life of a textile entrepreneur and the owner of a censored newspaper, the Apple Daily, Jimmy Lai. At Instituto Fe y Libertad, we are very pleased to spread the word about Jimmy Lai's current plight and this amazing new production by Acton. We've already had some screenings.
Good.
It's a very powerful documentary, and I would like to say I feel like this interview should be named the parish priest and Acton president and the newspaper magnate, because
Yes.
you've been friends with Jimmy Lai for over 2 decades.
Yes.
How did you become friends?
Well, I was on a visit to Hong Kong. I don't remember. It may have been my first visit to Hong Kong, and I was with the co-founder of the Acton Institute, Chris Morin, and we were invited to dinner with Jimmy Lai and his godfather, who also happened to be the editor of the Wall Street Journal Asia, and Bill McGurn, who is interviewed in the documentary.
Yes.
As well as at the time, the papal nuncio to Asia, or to those countries in Asia, Cardinal Filoni, who is now back at the Vatican. And we had a lovely dinner in an Italian restaurant in Hong Kong, believe it or not. It's such a cosmopolitan city. And I have to say, it was very good Italian food as well. I think the Cardinal agreed, and he would know.
Mm-hmm.
And
as
that's
would you.
Yes. And so that's how I got to know Jimmy Lai. And then we just became friends after that. I visited his homes both in Hong Kong and in Taiwan. It was just about the time that Apple Daily was beginning to come to the fore. I also visited with him in the United States, and then also in Italy, where I was able to be with he and his family, and took them to Pompeii, where my relatives originate from. So got to know him and his wife Teresa, who is a perfect saint. Lovely lady.
You wrote recently, and I want to quote you, that Mr. Lai's business acumen and intelligence were permitted to flourish under the reign of freedom and liberty in Hong Kong. And that's the end of the quote. Why is freedom so crucial for entrepreneurship to thrive?
Well, simply because people who are creative have the ability to respond to the needs and the opportunities that they see that exist in the market. Jimmy Lai was only one of many, many people in Hong Kong who were able to do that, and by virtue of that, provide goods and services for people not only in Hong Kong, but in the mainland China, and in the United States and throughout the world. So freedom is important because it allows people to respond to what they know, to what they hear, to what they see, to use their creative gifts. It's what Pope John Paul II calls individual initiative, personal initiative, to be creative. And in this sense, theologically, it's responding in a way like God responds to the creation of the world, just acting out the gift of creativity.
And as I understand it, Jimmy Lai's story is truly one of rags to riches,
It is
because
literally.
he was absolutely poor when he arrived in Hong Kong. He was a stowaway on a boat, and he was 12. He didn't speak
Yes.
English, and he had limited skills, and yet he got a job and he worked up the social and economic ladder. So
Yes.
what can we learn about his work experiences?
He tells the story so beautifully, which we've put in the documentary. He was born in Shanghai, and during the Cultural Revolution, his family was repressed. He was taken from his mother, and because she was forced to work, and he was a stowaway, as you say, on a fishing junk that made the crossing. And in those days when you were mainland Chinese, the moment you touched Hong Kong territory, you were free. You were a citizen. And he began first by working in a textile company. He was also handling baggage. And that's where he first began to meet people from the West. He then worked very hard, accumulated money, invested in the stock market, made contacts with people all over. And he describes a very important encounter that he had in the home of a Jewish gentleman in New York City. And the gentleman took from his shelf the book by Friedrich Hayek, The Road to Serfdom. And Jimmy said, very tearfully, as he says in the documentary, this book changed my life. And it changed his life because it helped him to understand that in order for society to be creative, it had to be free to respond to the knowledge that exists, that no one person or one group of people can know the knowledge that exists in the market. That is what people need for their survival. And he then built his own textile company. He decided to get into the newspaper business. This was right about the time of Tiananmen Square in 1989. So I met Jimmy probably in the mid 90s.
Yes. Giordano was very successful, right?
Yes.
And then he established Apple Daily, the newspaper, and that also became very popular very quickly. And Lai does state in the documentary that he got into the newspaper business because he was shocked by what the Chinese regime had done, you know, brutal repression against the peaceful demonstrators on Tiananmen Square.
Yes.
How are political freedom and economic freedom intertwined? Is it very important as well, political freedom?
It is. I mean, political freedom, for example, Giordano, what he did was, this is now, picture this was a large company with a lot of retail stores throughout mainland China, which is mainly where his market was. And he began to print these T-shirts about freedom for the Tiananmen Square demonstrators. And that was economic freedom, right? But it was also making a political statement. And that's when they demanded that he sell the company or that they would confiscate it. And so he decided to sell it at a loss and said, well, you know, rather than putting just one message on one T-shirt, how about if I create a media company, which he did. And it became the largest newspaper in Hong Kong, the most read newspaper in Hong Kong. It was very interesting. And I don't read Chinese, I have to be honest with you, but I had friends explain to me that it was a combination of one of these English newspapers, kind of scandal sheets, combined with the sophistication of the Wall Street Journal editorial page. And I was even published in the Apple Daily on several occasions. But it was a mixed bag to appeal to a very broad market, the Hong Kong market.
And he was very successful. Something that really astounded me is the Fraser Institute Index. It still ranks Hong Kong as #1 in economic freedom, despite the well-documented political repression
Yeah.
that has been exercised by the Chinese government.
Yeah, I
So,
want to see how long this lasts, though, because I mean, if we just take Jimmy Lai as an example, this man employed thousands of journalists and other people, not just journalists, but people who printed the papers and delivered the papers, and the people who sold the papers and made money off the sale of the papers. All of that is gone. Now, he's only one person in Hong Kong and in China who have had to face this. Now, people have responded differently. Jimmy has responded with great principle and great conviction for reasons that we can talk about. But if that's an indication of the price that the Chinese Communist Party is willing to pay to repress political freedom, then they have to understand at some point economic freedom is going to be impacted by that as well.
Well, soon after his newspaper started circulating in Hong Kong, the Chinese government took over administration of the territory, right?
Yes.
Which was probably previously part of the British Commonwealth. And repression started almost right away, despite the promises that they had made about retaining the system, right?
Yeah, it was just a classic dismissal of one's commitments on the part of the communists. They just blew it away. It existed for a while until the present premier could gain control over the Communist Party, and they just disregard the covenant that they had established. It was supposed to be one country, two
systems.
Two systems. And now it's becoming one country, one system.
Very rapidly, right? Even
as we speak.
And then they passed the national security law as well that sort of enables them to do these things.
Precisely. As though they need any law to enable them to do what they want to do. Anyway. They want the pretense of this.
The Financial Times says that the Chinese Communist Party considers Jimmy Lai its most dangerous and outspoken critic. And as you state, totalitarians fear human liberty and its creativity because it flies in the face of centralized control over the hearts and minds of people. Could you explain this insight?
Well, let's look at it from the perspective of a totalitarian regime. The very name tells you what it is. They have to have all of the control. They have to concentrate all of the control. And it's not so easy to make a distinction between economic and political or religious freedom because these things are intertwined. I mean, economic freedom is important to political freedom because you want to have a free press. You want to be able to produce what you want to produce and say what you want to say. Similarly with religion. So as they begin to consolidate their control, somebody like a Jimmy Lai who stands up and says, no, this is not right. I speak out against it. Or Cardinal Zen, who is a friend of Jimmy Lai, who is presently standing trial for some minor legal status of a foundation that he founded. These people who are willing to stand against this are a very severe threat because it's like poking a hole in a dam. If you poke a hole in the dam, the water comes flooding out first through that small little hole, but then pretty soon it explodes and collapses the whole dam. And that's what they're afraid of.
Yeah, well, the newspaper has been closed for over a year.
Yes.
And Jimmy Lai is in prison, and roughly 1,000 journalists are unemployed. The headquarters are empty, but there's like a defiant sign on the outside. It says, "Give me back my freedom."
Yeah.
And it really makes us think about freedom of the press and freedom of expression in Latin America, and what we can do to prevent this type of situation from coming to our countries.
Yes.
We already see many countries in the region banning free speech,
Yes.
such as Nicaragua and Venezuela. So, what can be done?
Speak. What you need are heroes. It's easy for me to say that here in the United States, but of course, even in the United States, we're having people say that, both on the left and the right, by the way. This isn't just a left or right thing. Communism so incredibly exemplifies this. But there are tendencies on the right to fight back with the same weapons that we're being persecuted with from the left. I think this is a mistake. It's a deadly mistake. So what we need are heroic people. And I know that people have families to consider and their livelihood, and all people are in different circumstances. But it doesn't take a few people. What people need to realize is that there are more of us than there are of them. Mm-hmm. And that we can appeal to the consciences of even the police and the armies. And if we do this enough, if enough of our leaders stand forward heroically and declare this, it's like Václav Havel said in the then Czechoslovakia. He said, what we need to do is not to live the lie. We need to live the truth and just believe in the truth of things. And the truth is that human beings are born free. And no dictators, no systems have the right to do that. So the Daniel Ortegas of this world, or the Maduros of this world, need to be reminded of that constantly until they can't sleep anymore.
The other thing that is very interesting in the documentary is that Jimmy Lai converted to Catholicism.
Yes.
How is religious faith important for people who face hardship?
Well, Jimmy converted in large part because of the example of his own wife, Teresa, who was a Catholic. And the real threat to these dictatorships are people who live by their conscience. And religion in particular has a way of fortifying people, because what religion does, and I can speak from the perspective as a Christian, as a Catholic, that Christianity teaches me something about the value and end of my life. Not just the here and now, not just how I can benefit in the here and now, but the moral purpose of my life. And time again, for 2,000 years, we've seen men and women with extraordinary faith, heroic faith, standing against regimes of various kinds throughout history and threatening their existence, because what we are in essence saying is, you are not God. We will worship the true and the living God. And there was an ancient phrase that was used during the period of persecution in Rome against the church. Remember that the church was driven underground into the catacombs, and scores of men and women, boys and girls were martyred because they would not renounce their faith. And eventually one person wrote in an ancient document this wonderful phrase: the blood of the martyrs is the seed of Christians. So that as you step over us and we show our confidence and faith in God, it inspires conversions. And it did in ancient Rome, and it does today. Another example of this in Asia was Cardinal Francis Xavier Nguyen Van Thuan, who was in jail in Vietnam for 13 years, 9 of them in solitary confinement. And he lived with great serenity and peace in the midst of that circumstance. And what happened was he began converting his guards. So the communists in Vietnam didn't know what to do with him. They began by rotating the guards, but then they found that as they rotated the guards, the ones who had been converted would convert others. And so they said, we'll just give him one set of guards and let him convert them, but they have to enforce it. So it is a real threat, because when people have conscience, when people defy the claim of the state to be God, it undermines the whole legitimacy of the state.
Yes, that's a beautiful story. He wrote a small book about it.
Yes, Witness to Hope.
Witness to Hope, yes.
Or maybe Testimony of Hope. Testimony of Hope.
How has the Hong Konger been received internationally?
Well, what we're doing now is we're showing it at various venues in private settings, so that a given group, and we also have it running through the film festival system. Everywhere it has been shown, just as you said, it's very emotional. People respond. They find profound inspiration. That's exactly what we intended to do when we produced it. We wanted to tell the story as accurately and as honestly, and yet as inspirationally as we could. And when a person who is from Venezuela, or from Cuba, or from Nicaragua, or from Vietnam sees this, they realize this isn't just about Hong Kong. This isn't just about Jimmy Lai. This is about human freedom. This is about the whole of the human race. And we've been gratified by the letters that we've received. And remember, this isn't even the full release of this yet. This is just very select private groups that we're showing this to.
And one other question is, what are your hopes for Jimmy Lai's future?
Well, you're asking a priest that question, so of course I have great hopes for his future in light of his fidelity to God. But I'm, of course, speaking about eternal life here. That is Jimmy, who is being fortified now by reading the classics of Christian literature. He asked me if I could recommend things for him to read, and among the things I suggested he read was the autobiography of Cardinal Van Tuan as well, see what could be done. But you're, of course, asking the question on a practical level. We simply don't know. Because of the threat that he poses to the communists, it could very well be that he will receive a harsh penalty. He could be under this new legislation in Hong Kong now. They could transfer him from Hong Kong prison to China, which makes it much more difficult, because then his wife can't visit him. Cardinal Zen can't visit him. The communications are much more truncated, and it's much more obscure how the courts in mainland China. Jimmy could die in prison, and it pains me greatly to say that, but I also know that he knows that. And he also, by the way, knows what's going on. He knows that we've produced this movie. His family has seen the movie and is very grateful. So they've communicated that to him as well. So this, if he, God forbid, has to die, he dies knowing that he's fulfilled his vocation, because he speaks about this being his calling. Remember, this is a man who is a billionaire, who could have gone to any number of residences throughout the world and lived very comfortably the rest of his life. Made the choice not to. There's great freedom in that. When you can do that, you're free. Even if you're in a prison, you're free.
I agree. Well, I hope that your movie helps to create this international pressure.
We hope
that
so.
is so huge that it will help him. So
we're glad that people in Guatemala have a chance to see this now and apply it to your own circumstance.
That's right. I think there are many lessons to be learned from the documentary for the region, and I think that you are right in pointing out the immense freedom that Jimmy Lai exhibits in his, and fortitude in his choices. So
yes.
Thank you so much for sharing his story with us, and for sharing your time with us here at Instituto Fe y Libertad.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this program. For more information about Instituto Fe y Libertad, its work, activities, and what we discussed in today's episode, please visit www.feylibertad.org and its pages on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and our YouTube channel. Thank you once more, and until next time.